And thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to come listen to this topic that maybe is turning out to be more relevant than we had expected in regular life besides extensions. So I'll come back to that topic a couple of times, but more importantly, I want to make sure that we cover and establish a base. Mark, I'm assuming that my presentation and desktop is being shared. So
It is, yeah, and it looks good.
thank you. So first, a little bit about me. As is common in extension, we want to state how long we've been around and what qualifies us. I've only been in extension about 6 years, and the last couple have been in 4-H specifically. Before I was in the Office of Hispanic Outreach, which was in Illinois, the office that reported to director on growth of our growth in Latino areas. And ever since I left the University of Pennsylvania, I've been working on my own in different, mostly aggregating data and working out in the community. But my time at the University of Pennsylvania was split into two. The Lauder Institute of International Studies. We work with the School of Business, the Wharton School of Business, and we internationalize their students. Whereas at the International Literacy Institute, I mostly worked in literacy, adult literacy across the US, developing software, and then across the world in training and developing methods for reaching the poorest of the poor. And before that, as you know, we all have a long history. I won't bore you with it, but just to tell you that both the education that I had in the schools, University of Pennsylvania, Brigham Young, New Mexico State, gave me a base to get to the point where my most important work has actually been as an immigrant working, organizing and serving immigrant communities over time. While I had studied social linguistics, educational linguistics, I've ended up working very directly with various immigrant communities, but face validity, I work with the Latino community most directly. In Illinois, I am in charge of developing 4-H with first-generation Latino families. And as I will talk about later, that's meant basically that we're gearing up 4-H to reach all immigrant communities. About you, I realize webinars are not the most interactive things, even when you try to throw in the others. So I'd like for you to think of a couple of questions and then pop in on the chats and pepper with questions to me and to share with others about this. If you came to this webinar, you either are serving immigrants or you want to serve immigrants. Right now, we have our own all extension conference going on in North Carolina. I imagine other states are doing the same thing this week or around. And if we're lucky, there are a few people in our extension systems that are serving immigrants. How you do it is part of the question of the how that I won't be dealing with as much. The first cut is usually in translations, sometimes workshops, sometimes in memberships and volunteers. We in Illinois in 4-H have just, this year we doubled the number of Latinos in clubs, which is our metric for how much we're reaching them. Of course, not all Latinos are first-generation immigrants, but their families are first-generation being involved with extension. You should have an idea, and I will give you a couple of resources, but besides the census of what the percentage of immigrants is in your area, I'll be basing a lot of my comments on that. And a key question for a more advanced situation is, do you have immigrant staff? And as you'll see, it's one of the questions that I've gotten to myself. And I'd like to start out then by going over, I left my note for myself. If you're interested in membership in a group that deals with these questions, please feel free to contact me at the email that will be posted. Look at this beautiful quote. Those, who do we serve? Who do land grants serve? Those who snatched their education, such as it is, from the crevices between labor and sleep. They grew up in twilight. Our country depends upon them as its right arm to the handiwork of the nation. Let us then furnish the means for the arm to acquire culture, skill, efficiency. This is, of course, Mr. Merrill, way back in 1857. But I think it's appropriate for us to ask that question today. I'll be coming back to this contrast. I've decided to put my presentation more in a contrast, the historical versus today, and ask questions more than the how, because many of these questions don't have easy answers, and we're all working at them in parallel, and coordination is useful, but not in a webinar situation. I would imagine that's a conference roundtable panel. That's where we can get there to answering those how questions and sharing skills. I also believe that in the historical, in the history of where we come from as land grants institutions, we have a lot of the answers. I purposely named my presentation to put a little bit of tension. Are immigrants an opportunity, a challenge, or obligation for extension? No buildup. My answer is definitely an opportunity. But the twist is that it isn't now an opportunity to work with immigrants. It has always been, and I'll show, and I hope to get you there. So Mr. Morrill, I want to go to him because I think it provides good context for today. This is his biography in a nutshell. He was a Connecticut kid. He always expressed his interest to go to college, but his dad said, we just don't have money for you and your brothers. So he went into business, dry goods. He opens a big, what the equivalent of a big box store, and makes a lot of money. He gets quite rich, and then he officially retires from that business at 38 and gets into politics, gets elected as a congressman. And then he makes it his mission to make it easier for other people to have what he didn't have, which was a formal education. I know that that's not what we want to hear about necessarily, and we don't want to denigrate his position. He said a lot of beautiful things, but when it comes to us, that's where he started. Elected, I believe, in 55. In 57, he puts up his first bill. And eventually gets passed in the House by almost. If you think our politics are so controversial, in the House he won by 3 votes. And then it goes to the Senate after a long fight. He wins by just a few votes. So the bill that he puts forward, which is establishing education for all, basically for the poor and for all those farmers and all those people that didn't have access. If you can remember, 1860, 1850s, we were still quite agrarian. But then an interesting happens, and I want to dwell on it because, again, when it comes to the context of today, we don't want to touch this topic because we want to stay apolitical and we want to keep on working on what we came to do. But if you can believe, when Mr. Morrill passes this bill along with both houses, it goes to the president vetoes it. He tries again, but the Morrill Act of 1862 passes. If you can think of 1862, when did the war start? 1861. Where do the votes that didn't want this to happen, to go ahead, come from? The southern states. Now we're at war. They're not present. The bill passes, and there's a stipulation here for all that money, in terms of land grants, but eventually money, and that is the southern states. Those that seceded don't get any of it. You can imagine how happy they are for it, but it's again, contrast with today. We have had a week of, it's been a week since the election awakening. and yet we're not at civil wars, even with all the things that are going on in the street. So I'm just saying the context of where we work is as political as it's always been. It goes up and down, but when it comes to providing legislation as visionary as this, and the work that it entails, has a context, and we just keep going right through it. So I want to point out also Mr. Moral 2.0, which is after this, the war is won from the north, and then there is a number of schools are established across the nation. The southern states are invited to do this, and they decide that thank you very much, but we just can't have blacks. That's just not important for us. It just doesn't fit the mission of our states. By now, we know that Mr. Morrill borrowed his idea of education for all from European ideas. Land grant. It was actually Illinois, the Assembly of Illinois, who proposed to the federal Congress to say, you know, why don't we do a land grant like we've done for other things like the railroad? But really, the how we get to this is basically that there is a political and immigration context, you know, a fight between the states just as we have today, and yet they still come up with the bill of 1890, in which, as we know, the 1890s land grants are really began as serving the African American population, the historically black colleges. Why? Because the states didn't want to do it. That is, they didn't want to serve that segment of the population. I ask you today, as I go to other maps, how it fits with our context today in serving, because I hope that really after this 30-minute exposition, that we can talk on the same basis of we're not doing anything different, we're not addressing anyone different. If federal mandates change, that'll be something different, but our base is still in serving those people that need access. So let me go get to some maps. And I'm going to start in the year 1900. I know it's a small map on your screen, so concentrate in the area of your of the screen of wherever you are. It looks like Wisconsin is there, so I'll bring it up a little bit more. But what you're seeing is a map produced by the New York Times. It's a very good interactive map. I'll give you the link in just a minute. Immigration Explorer at NewYorkTimes.com. You can find it. Here, the darkness means that the percentage of the population that is foreign born, that is immigrants, first generation immigrants, is highest. And then the color in this is Western Europe. These oranges and browns are Asia, Latin America. The light purples, which are not showing up too well here at this zoomed up level, zoomed out, is Africa. And as you can tell, on our northern border, we have plenty of Canadian immigrants. This is the year 1900. Again, the moral acts have happened. The 1890 one expanded it to more of the population, and as you can tell, the South does not have a lot of immigrants. But by the time, and we'll see in just a minute, by the time we get to the Smith-Lever Act, which is therefore then the institution of extension in a very formalized way, and I'll come back to the father of in a little bit. The context then is this is where immigrants were and how they were distributed across the nation. For those of you in Iowa and Wisconsin, as you can tell, there was a greater percentage of the population from Western Europe. Most of you that are from there are probably grandchildren of these people that had just arrived. Notice also the uniformity, that is how many there were all across that section of the country, the Midwest. Most of you are from the Midwest, and how scarce they were in others because of the light color. If we move on to 1910, contrast 1900, 1910, you notice that the foreign-born population is going everywhere. Well, actually, I jumped to 1920. You can go to it in Immigration Explorer for 1910. I meant to do this because by then we're in full-scale large immigration. In the early 1890s, a bill had been passed which basically excluded Chinese from coming in. But by the 1920s, Western and Eastern Europe were really coming to this land. Various incentives. As the land grant and more acreage became available to the West, we see then a growth of the percentage of immigrants. The mostly Mexicans coming in from the South had already been acquired in 1842. I mean, in 1848, this land that had been acquired was mostly was part of Mexico and Spain, and so the Southwest contained a lot of Hispanics, and they weren't necessarily then foreign-born. At this time, though, we start getting them officially foreign-born because the border has crossed them, and they start being identified. So this is 1920 is a time that many people compare to today when it comes to the percentage of immigrants. A lot of immigrants were coming in not only through Ellis Island, but they were coming in, how can I say, inspected when it comes to getting off the boat and being checked over. There were very few reasons, usually health reasons, to not accept somebody. So the cobblers, the blacksmiths, whoever was, as long as they were able to work, they were welcomed into the country. But that created a huge influx for various reasons, push factors in the source countries. But it created also a reaction, much as today when it comes to immigration. There was a bill passed, I believe, in 1924, in which it got really picky as how which countries were encouraged and which ones were not. It was a numbers game starting at that time. But as you can see, when the percentage starts getting high, the native born start getting worried that resources aren't going to be able to go around. Things change in the next little while, but besides the First World War, the Second World War, and this is by 1970. Notice how homogeneous we have become. That is, less percentage of foreign-born, but also less percentage of foreign-born, but also populations are spread across the U.S. So while you have a low percentage, usually about 2% across, we have the separation there. The Hispanics keep coming. I'm from the border. This going back and forth on the border was always an easy thing. Look at the Canadians also still being there, but they're the only significant population centers. By 1970, we also have had Cuba. Exiles fleeing Castro, and so they've set themselves up here in the Miami and southern Florida area. But this is very important to see, because in 1970 are the good old days. That is when we were all more the same. The GI Bill came into place. The Morrill Act also did us a number in that there wasn't just a few people that came and wanted to go to college. A lot of people wanted to go to college. And let me just drive up so you get a sense of before I come to the other slides. This is 1980, 1970, 1980. What you should see is a change of color. That is the source. The very few that were still foreign-born start going. The South has the same percentage as in many areas, but look, by 1980, what happens? You lose your Western Europe, and you start gaining percentages of others. And therefore, the Canadians coming in, no one talks about them, but the blues start receding and the other colors start coming in. Not only in skin color, of course, but the source countries, the source regions of the world start changing. This happens mostly because by in the late 60s, basically a family reunification law of immigration came in and started bringing in people that already had a stake here to bring their families. Uh, and then by 1990, this is 1980, 1990, you see the big change, the Southwest, the Latinos establishing themselves. By 1990, the so-called amnesty, I don't like to call it amnesty because it was a regularization of people that were already here and had been here for quite a while. If there were forgiveness, it was more for the employers than it was for the people that were already here and had already lived here. 1986, Reagan. And so, but you see also that in other parts of the country, you start getting a change. And then by the year 2000, I'm not going to go further on it, but you start seeing the reaction and thus the escalation that happens today as people, as the native born start fearing. What does this has to do with extension? Now, as you look at your area of your country that goes that notices the change, I'm going to go back to the 1900s for a second. You should notice that there is reason for people to get unsettled. That is, there is a larger percentage of immigrants. And so, let me go back to 1900. When it's just gray, it means there was no data. But as you can see, your area of the country, the percentage then goes through a shift. And even today, when we get to the 2000s, you start seeing also the South light up, not only the Southwest, with Latinos, but with other groups. By the time you get to 2010, you see the Asians also climbing up in different sections of the country, and therefore the native born are feeling uncomfortable. There's a greater percentage of people, including in the rural counties. Myself and 4-H in Illinois, I work mostly in rural counties as we prepare to go into the cities with proven materials. So I wanted to give you that because as I come back then to the context of Mr. Morrill and the laws that changed, oh, this always happens. Give me a second to get to the right. When election comes into being, there are items look like today. This for us not serve immigrants because I don't know is valid to a reason. That is, we have not had a lot of practice over the last 50 years, but it is not new. And the percentage of immigrants, my presentation today was going to be very much on the data of immigrants. But if you need to be convinced that there is, just compare yourself to the 1900s and say, there are actually, the percentage of immigrants today is no less and probably not very much more than it was in the early 1900s. That is, we have lived through this before, and the process of integration is about the same. So let me come then to the father of extension, late 1890s, starting out also Midwest. Interestingly, in the 1890s, George Washington Carver also was commissioned by Booker T. Washington to go to every county in a buggy, loaded with all the materials, just like many of us and agents across the country do today. Everyone in extension has a van because they have to fill it up, because when they get there, they got to do their own training. But coming then back to this, the threefold mission of extension, of research, teaching, is I changed it to eyes because it rhymed better with what I wanted to say. But to say these haven't changed, we in land grants have started looking at these, and there's all kinds of maybe changes that are forthcoming as monies change. But really, constant is at the bottom of the pile when it comes to economics, to knowledge, to education, have been the immigrants. Extension has served them. For me, the biggest difference of this eye of immigrants is that it is, and I haven't found the data yet, I'm predicting it, but as I go deeper into the history, the number of staff that were immigrants would have had to have been higher. That is, those people that spoke the language and understood the practices. And let me digress for a second. 4-H began, the story I like to tell, the original 4-H was the corn clubs. The parents didn't want innovation. They didn't see it themselves. Mr. Knapp himself saw it as, let's not do it in classrooms, let's go out in the fields and try it out. The parents didn't want to do it, so they connived. They came up with a program for giving the kids corn seeds. When the kids start growing better corn, they win a prize from the organizers, but more importantly, the parents see that the kids are producing better corn than themselves. So the parents start doing. So let me switch then to, if these are, and you buy my argument that immigrants have been a part of extension except for a period where we lost our skill to do it, there are two basic barriers or situations that I think need to be dealt with, and I'll share with you my opinion, and I welcome yours, whether here in the chat or afterwards. And that is, there's the funding issue. Just as in every other thing, and just as in the competition between urban, rural, the allocation of resources is a contention. Notice that it was the same with Mr. Morrow. People did not want to distribute the land in the same way for the universities, but for everything else that came with extension. The tension was high. But today, the native born think, I gotta have it, right? And even if it comes from the federal source, the local counties are still, looking at the immigrant population and says they didn't pay into it. There's a couple of articles that say, really, the studies show that both immigrants pay, undocumented and documented, but importantly, they contribute to the economic well-being of the areas in which they move into. So anyway, so this is, for me, the larger question, the one that local solutions have to be, because as I put down at the bottom here, we're used to seeing it in small type, and we're also used to just claiming it. But I think that that's where it goes, because the Smith-Lever funding requires a similar statement as this, and this is what we put on in Illinois, and you have something similar. As extension land grants a lot, some of your money always comes from the federal side, and some of you are anything printed, whatever. Smith-Lever money requires us to put this on there. But I want to read it because I think that we haven't yet adopted it. The University of Illinois, and the College of Agriculture and Consumer Sciences, the United States Department of Agriculture, local extension councils cooperating with the University of Illinois Extension provides equal opportunities in programs and employment. Does it? When it comes to immigrants, does it in your area? And then I go back to my original question. And then we ask them if they need reasonable accommodation. And that's when I want to get to my next question, because I realize as time flies that I don't want to be speaking more than 30 minutes. This is what we normally talk about, integrating immigrants and doing the job. So I ask you, is translation an accommodation? But more importantly, is engagement differently? Because we provide programming and employment. Do we? So as I look through the literature, both Joe and other places, I am surprised. There's two studies that I like to cite in which we're getting at the needs assessment. But I'm venturing here to say that we are not yet fulfilling what our funding is requiring us to do. And in practice, but also as I've started realizing why I have this practice, that translations are not even close to engagement. They give us a sense of service. It's kind of like the easiest thing to do, as hard as it is. But every time I see and of course I speak as a Latino, as a 4-H'er, and someone who loves extension, but every time I see a sign in Spanish, even a brochure in Spanish across anywhere I go, or in any other language, the same thing happens. I get closer. I want to see. And unfortunately, in extension offices across the country, when we see something in my language and I call in, there is no one to answer the question. So my first then criticism that I have, the funding issue may be out of our control in many ways because it deals with a lot of other moving parts, but excuse me, but this one is, we need to think beyond that, beyond what translation would be. And if for no other reason than the legal obligation. All of us are funded through USDA monies. USDA monies are required. This comes from the statements by USDA as to what our obligation is. You may not be able to read it just because of screens. So basically, the law requires that it provides, those laws provide that no person shall be discriminated against on the basis of race, color, or national origin, or be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity of an applicant or receiving federal financial assistance from the Department of Agriculture or any agency thereof. That is, if we get USDA money, we're supposed to be serving them. And we're not supposed to be serving them just on the light level. As you can see, it's lep.gov. It's an excellent site. It goes by every department and tells you what their guidance are for ELLs. ELLs are English language learners, people that are limited proficiency in English, which usually are the foreign-born. And therefore, this is a continuation of their directives. This guidance does not impose any new requirements. And I think that's important. It's been with us for a while, but we just haven't done them. LEP, limited English proficiency persons, we're supposed to ensure that LEP persons receive the language assistance necessary to afford them meaningful access to USDA programs and activities free of charge. Contrast, if we publish a brochure in extension in the language of whatever immigrants that we're targeting, and that's all we do, is that meaningful access? Count how many publications you put out and how many workshops you put out, and then feel the difference. Myself, I was last spring, as I recall correctly, I was I work for youth development, but Ag was having a large animal composting. We went to the north of the state, and I was their bridge to the Latino speakers there, to Latino Spanish speakers. And it was very interesting to me how the two groups within that training interacted with the information. The workers, usually supervisors, are the ones that came to this training, not the laborers, had been doing the composting for a long time. They just didn't understand the why. They had never been invited, as Mr. Morrill asks, to why the temperature, why the organic matter. They just did it as directed. In the English speaker section, their questions were as to regulations. How can I make sure I get some of the money that the USDA is providing for this? It was very interesting for me because while it was meaningful access to the program, it was not yet the meaningful access of what do you do when you have to deal with the government, just like contracts or whatever else that we do. So I've left with you two questions of what is happening out there. And this directive from USDA also has this, which we all know as the Civil Rights Review. And while we all kind of stumbled through it, the morality of getting money for something that we don't do, I think, is something that extension agents want to correct. And in this case, for me, it's knowing the law and knowing that we shouldn't be as afraid of it as we should. So we would, and if we're not serving this full access capacity, meaningful access, we are violating Title VI and its regulations. So now to some positive things that I see with it within extension. There was a survey done in the southern states and then replicated by Ruben Martinez is the last name that's coming to me, of wider Midwest especially, of the needs of extension people to serve immigrants. I'll refer you to it later, but I'm gonna give you this one that I just saw from the group for underserved minorities at NIFA. So they've recently carried out a survey. Their N was 500 and some, but it was mostly educators, and they asked who they're serving. It was mostly Spanish speakers. There were a few Koreans, Filipinos, and it turns out, it was mostly Spanish speakers, and as the populations that they were getting is the Mexicans. Mexicans, we tend to stand out. We are not the only immigrants, but we are the larger percentage of the Latino immigrants, and Latinos are the largest immigrant group presently. Asians are quickly growing, and the myriad of languages and services that they will need are also. As you can see, it's the people that answer this survey are, some of them are serving the immigrants, a third of them, and I want you to look at the barriers, because I think that's where it's at. If you look at the barriers of transportation, cost, kids having to stay home and translate for their parents and the home obligations or whatever, they really trump what the immigration status of the person is and the language barriers. That is, when agents want to serve, they find a way and they encounter the other barriers, because the barriers have to do with barriers that poor people have. Transportation cost, they have to go home, they have two jobs. People that traditionally, or in its inception, and Mr. Morrill, Mr. Hatch, wanted to serve as to the mission of the land grant, and certainly then extension by 1914. So what did they find out? That the key areas of improvement were that they are synthesizing the survey now, but that we just need awareness. We need this kind of webinar. We need to support each other in finding out more about what's going on, what the laws are, and really start getting into the culturally relevant programming that needs to be done. And that, in me and 4-H, it means not doing just the translations. That is only, in fact, I've refused to do it too fast, because I don't want to invite people to a place that isn't welcoming. We've recently started a program called Juntos for high school and middle school students, because immigrant parents want their kids to go to college. And so this is a career readiness program that we're very happy to start implementing in Illinois. So I want to stop here. There are many other resources. I can email them to you as you put them in. I need to switch over to Mark, because he cautioned me after 30 minutes people fall asleep, and I'll switch to with the other materials to the questions that you may have. Thank you very much, and Mark, it's yours.
Yeah, I just encourage folks in chat, and would encourage you to ask any questions you've got. We've got a few comments and things. Sandra put a comment in Q&A and says, besides some publications in Spanish, their county office websites have a drop-down to choose a language, to choose a language. So she says that's helping out.
Yeah, Sandra. In fact, as we all move to websites that are based on content management systems, it's actually quite easy to change the language of the interface. And Google Translate and all that helps get the gist of what we of what the pages are. I would say commendable work to put it as an option, and then in your future work to say and to come back to your own leaders and say, is this meaningful engagement? And since it isn't, and I don't mean to call you out, we are all in that situation. And since it isn't, what can we do to make it meaningful? Because when it comes to actually reaching them, the education of the general population, we need to do more than just give them the gist of what's happening. So I'm glad. I think you're Wisconsin. You guys are up there.
Joseph says, is there any model for best practices for efficiently serving immigrants in country?
Actually, so one of my biggest surprises when I started, I was hired initially as a consultant for the 4-H office, and I just thought we're in Illinois. You know, there's border states, there's Florida, there's New York, there's all the other places where Latino immigrants are quite numerous. I'll just go to their websites and get what they want and adapt it to Illinois. California, certainly. Texas told me, Ricardo, you're about 5 years ahead of us when the stuff we were putting out, which was very meager. California, just this year, got on the bandwagon of doing it more systematically. They just allocated several million to it, but their agents will tell you they are sorely off on it. Curiously for me, Kansas, Oregon, have been great states. The program that we're adopting is Juntos from North Carolina. They've also produced some very good things. Puerto Rico has been functioning in Spanish for a long time, you know, since inception for them. And they're mostly agricultural focused. And so both in 4-H and the other programs, they have materials. Best practices, if you look at Joe, Journal of Extension, if you look at other places like that, no one's compiled them, but really it has to do with when we don't have enough experience, it's hard for anybody to put out best practices. On the screen, as I give you, you know, as I responded to the resources, is the most important person that you can get to are what we call gatekeepers. People that are bridges, that are bilingual, that are bicultural, that are living in the community. They know the needs. You can do your own needs assessment. In Illinois, we've done, I don't know, half a dozen in the last 10 years. They come back with the same needs as they are nationally. And they are your basics. Your basics of people adjusting to a new society. You know, some of it is language, but they want education. They want to do better. And so as we validate those, we'll come up with best practices, but really you don't have to look very far to say these are needs, and your gatekeepers can tell you that.
Okay, Ricardo, we got a few other questions. Ricardo, if you could, when you adjusted your mic that last time, it's a little close to your mouth and you're getting a little bit of feedback. So if you want to sort of pull that away.
Right.
Colleen says, my struggle is in getting immigrants to attend programming. Any suggestions on how to welcome them to programs? Also, other 4-H volunteers are not particularly welcoming. This stems from their discomfort with a culture they don't understand.
Yeah, so in Illinois, one of the things that I've done, anticipating this, because from rallies to classes on Know Your Rights or adjusting to the U.S. to English classes. English classes have a high attendance rate compared to other things, so that may be one. But know that with almost every new community, we're a new brand. They don't know who we are. They may come from countries in which government programs always come with a big trade. You come because of this. Many times I've been asked, what party do you work for? Getting government assistance of the type that we're giving that is very valuable and it is recognizable as very valuable must come with some strings attached. So it takes a while. We changed our piloting. We had plenty of money to hire people, staff for 1 year. And as I went back and forth with you know, getting a scope of work, I said, you know what? It's better to have 3 years to build up the confidence and to build up the numbers at a quarter time, or a third time, than it is to have 1 year at full time to hire staff. You need to have people with you, build the trust. The gatekeepers are the ones that already work in the community, that already have some trust. When you can convince those gatekeepers to come and bring their children or come to the workshops, they will be your spokespeople and they will bring them in.
Sandra's comment says, as an extension professional, I only speak English. I do utilize bilingual and trained facilitators to deliver the Juntos, or I may be saying that wrong, program. Beyond that, I'm at a loss for what I can do. I have been asking for cultural appreciation training, so I have a greater understanding of other populations. Any other ideas of how I can respond?
Yes, Sandra. So I seen that you also have a bilingual educator, and it should help. But look at it for yourself, Sandra. My experience now with new people has been that when I hire a coordinator, the impact is felt in the families out there. I hire bilingual biculturals, and so they'll go out and reach the Spanish monolingual population. But one of the biggest changes is in their peers, in their coworkers, the other coordinators. My hands down lovely citation is one of the counties up north, close to Wisconsin, where we've now on our second coordinator in a year and a half. They move on, but the local coordinator went from my first time that I met her, that she was uncomfortable walking into a little Mexican store, but I wanted to take her to the back where food was there, and she said, "How about we meet somewhere else?" Because she meeting inside the store was big, you know, it was all in Spanish. And curiously that day, what happened is I picked her up at the bank. We went over to the little store, wanted to just buy a little bit of food to give her a taste. And in the back of the store where the restaurant is, who was there? The sheriff. The sheriff was there, and he's her neighbor, and so they started chatting, and they realized that it was homey, that they liked it there. But that coordinator today, a year and a half later, runs meetings by herself. She still doesn't know Spanish. She still has lots of Spanish speaking kids in the room and parents, but she has gotten comfortable with the situation. So I would say, instead of paying for training, pay for more time to spend with those bilingual people, and they'll take you to their parties, they'll take you to the celebrations, they'll take you into their homes and feed you. And in that relationship, as one of those English speaking monolinguals told me this last week, I now know what Dia de los Muertos is. When my kid brought something from school, I saw it in the fridge, I knew what it was, and it was not scary, it was fun. And so I would say, then work with your peers, hang out with them, and that's better money than spent on training, because the training is give you some direction, but living people have a great time while learning this part.
Lisa put a question in Q&A. You mentioned gatekeepers. How do you go about connecting with them? Are there some strategies that you can suggest for connecting?
So notice all of these questions are in the how, not in the philosophical or larger points that I try to make in the presentation, because I know we want to just do it. We're extension. So Lisa, gatekeepers are all around you, but they're very few, and they're they're jealous. They know that their community is vulnerable. They know that, especially in these times of high rhetoric, things can happen, but they can't help it. They're like extension people. They want to help. When you bring those people to the knowledge, then they pass it on. So I'll give you an example. The little Mexican stores that you'll have in areas across the country, that store owner is a gatekeeper, because they keep their customers by getting to know them and talking to them. So that little store person has a lot of knowledge that if you get her and her kids involved, her because the husband has a day job. Latinos have, well, immigrants in general have a higher entrepreneurship rate. The numbers are very clear. Why? Well, because there is no government handout. If you don't work, you don't eat. And when you work, pay doesn't go up. How do you make extra money? You establish a business. So the business leaders in your community, the Chamber of Commerce has very mature people that have already been dealing with two worlds when it comes to the business, but also they're acculturated a little bit more, so they're accessible to English monolinguals. You also will have them in the churches. Churches are very dynamic, and so whether it's if it's Latinos, the traditional Catholic Church, if it's the others, you know, you still have people there that are helping out people adjust. Another place where I find gatekeepers, and this is a personal way for me, is I every town that has Latinos has two churches, and sometimes it's a Catholic church on one side or a Pentecostal one, but there's always the soccer fields. Engaging those people that are in the soccer field and directing the soccer is a great way, because they're a gatekeeper. When I used to run a soccer league, I had 500 to 600 people every weekend that I could access in one way or another, and it worked. I mean, I had HIV testing, I had food, I had nutrition, I had, you name it. I paced it in the community. And not all soccer organizers will welcome you, but their space is usually public, so you can set up there and slowly build presence there. And the gatekeepers will approach you. What are you doing? Who are you? You've come 3 times now. What does that mean that you're coming? What are you selling? They'll approach you too.
Okay, any other questions, folks? Just again, we'll take a few more minutes and give you time to ask some questions. Ricardo, just as a sort of an IT guy and a software guy, I'm curious about you've mentioned, or someone else made a comment about having an English translation on a website and things like that. But in general, what's the online presence for immigrants and Latinos, and what do the numbers look like, I guess, compared to the rest of the population?
Yeah, so the IT side is, as you know, voice recognition has improved a lot, and translation engines have progressed a lot. When it comes to doing a quick and dirty job, I view it, for example, as your first draft. When you do a flyer in any language, you want to get your ideas down, and then you sit on it. That's what translators and the IT side is at. They're on first draft. They get some of the message across. It's not finessed. It is especially not necessarily clear as our first draft of any work is. So it always needs a touch up, a human touch. But I would say that today is much better than it was. It used to be that you had to translate a whole website and basically do a mirror image of it. The content management systems that are coming up right now have those features built in, and the best part of it is that you can translate the system, the menus, whatever else once, and your content, as it's acquired and prepared, it can be slotted in. So it's in English one day, and then when you finish translating, you put it up, and it's available in that language when it's uploaded, but in the context of a full system that already is giving access. So at that level, we've made some great progress.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, even Google does, even if it's not baked into the content management system. Google,
they'll ask you, right?
Example, yeah, it will. And I don't know how. I'm sure there's some things lost in translation there, as it's an automated system, but certainly it's better than nothing.
It's better than nothing. You should know, immigrants have a high penetration of internet access.
Well, that was sort of what I was. That was sort of the point I was asking about too. Is how are they online, and is that, I guess, when extension agents and folks are looking at the time they're going to spend, is it worth taking the time to make sure they've got a good translation?
So think of it this way. The access by immigrants to the internet is in the 90s percentile through smartphones.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So not desktop. You're thinking quick bytes, which are easier to translate, and those quick little sections that can be sent over text. So 2 great technologies, since you brought up 2 great technologies. One is texting. If you don't have WhatsApp, you need to have it, because the rest of the world is using it, and that's the way to propagate things in phones across a lot of immigrants. I guess
being sure if you're doing web present stuff that it's mobile friendly, so it shows up.
Exactly. So texting, short little bytes, texting to one immigrant, if it's good, it'll be propagated. But the other one that is, I would say the technology of the year in about 2004 was GPS. because people reading signs, people finding things very hard to do when you don't have English as a language. And so giving GPS coordinates, putting in your zip code, the address and the zip code so people can punch it in, what a great access. If you want people to show up, make sure that you make it so that it's one click away for the GPS to pick it up and bring you home. Because as an immigrant, having been to many foreign countries where I don't know the script, I don't know how to get there. I take a picture of it and then find the picture. Well, GPS has helped us a lot that, and we should use it a lot.
Right. So. Okay, Colleen says, in Latino culture, are males more highly regarded than females? Should we strive to connect with males to gain credibility with women?
No. I mean, you can if you want to. As a male, I say the women do the work. The males may have the positions, they may have the instituted practice of being the head of the house, but if you convince the mom, you've got the whole household. So purposely, we call it first generation Latino families. We're not approaching the youth in 4-H in Illinois, we're approaching the families, and that means the mom knows. There are some dads, not to discredit all males, but some dads that will take it and filter things through. Mostly they've delegated that responsibility. So for except for job workshops or whatever else, but the entrepreneurial side is very much driven also by women. So I would say if you concentrate on the female side of the family, you'll make easier, faster progress, and then the males will come. Because they, of course, they have a strong role in their families.
And I imagine the strategies probably aren't any different for approaching a female than a male.
You know, it's a human.
Right.
Human before they have gender. So you be careful, you be respectful, you don't assume, and you keep on working with a person, and everything else will fall off eventually.
Joseph says, would the gender of extension staff matter in whether to deal with male or female?
You know, we when it's male privilege all over the world, it is what it is. Males, white males, and I used to run a workshop on this. I have not found a place where white males feel uncomfortable. For example, when a white female walks into a bar to ask for directions, let's say, well, before GPS, and you walk in and it's all males looking at you, you change your demeanor, you check your dress, you check your makeup, you check everything. That insecurity that females feel in that situation, immigrants are feeling most of the time. But white males have a very hard time finding situations where they don't where they can't handle it, in quotes. So I would say take a rural white male and put them in South Chicago, and that vulnerability comes out. But it just doesn't. It's just our society isn't structured like that. So.
Let's see. Violetta, again, I apologize if I'm messing up names here. She put a comment in chat. I think I misunderstood. It's probably not something published. I was wondering about the results of the survey on engagement with the immigrant youth and families that Ricardo presented. She had mentioned earlier, I'm not sure if you had a slide. She was referring to a slide.
Yeah, Violeta, I just put up that slide. Again, actually in the chat is Lupe Landeros, who just provided a link to the toolkit that we developed at the National we're part of the Latino advisory committee, and both the toolkit, but this particular slide of that survey was presented to us actually just, I believe, last week, the week before. They're just processing the data. Lupe, who's on the chat, is part of that group. And so she can give you the details of it. They're analyzing it. While they found nothing surprising, for me, the thing that stood out is treat immigrants as other people that have needs, and you're gonna get there. So anyway, Violeta, chat with Lupe right then and there, and get the lowdown of where they are. Okay.
We are at the top of the hour, so I think we're out of time. Ricardo, I didn't see, is your email on any of the slides?
Actually, so let me put that one
There we go. Yeah.
right there.
And this will help for the recording. I especially wanted to do it for not only folks live, but then if folks come back and watch the recording later.
Yeah.
Well, again, I want to thank everyone that's on the that's on the call live here. And again, we'll have a recording available at the Learn link. I put that in chat earlier. That'll be available in a few days. But Ricardo, I want to thank you so much. This has been great. I do a lot of these webinars, and sometimes the topics aren't as interesting or intriguing, but you've done a great job with keeping folks interest, and it's a very timely topic.
Thank you.
So thank you for taking the time to share. Any closing words?
Well, I'm just typing into the chat box. I was going to look for the link, but the way the setup is a pain to go look. But search for Latino PYD in Google Groups, and you can join the national group that focuses on that. And one last comment. Juntos was brought up. In our training last week with Juntos, the question was brought up. The school district says, why do you do this only for Spanish speakers? I need it for French speakers. And as we talk with the Juntos organizers, they have a specific program. And I looked at the materials. Those materials apply to African Americans and any immigrant family. That is, any group that needs to be brought into the brand of who we are, and that's a lot. All immigrants, extension they don't know, can deserve an approach. So use your Juntos materials, use other materials from one language to the other. I view in my extension system that whenever I translate something to Spanish and I force the English to clarify what they want to say, I've just helped the translation for 10 other languages when we get to it. Because the dense English language, when it's unpacked, then the automatic translator does a better job with it, but especially our programming can roll out easier. So once you do one language, the others get bettered, and that's my parting thought. So thank you.
All righty, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll talk more soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.